So ManaWāhineKōrero have asked me to look at the costs, like the size of this particular market. And I'll try to keep this short because I think it's a fairly dry topic, but it's an important topic. And I'm going to be focusing on Australia because New Zealand, whatever pattern Australia is following up, pattern that's happening around gender identity ideology in Australia, I'm noticing that you are following the same kind of pattern. So I think it's relevant for both. So here in Australia, we have got a major trans lobby, which is called ACON. They run a division of their business called Pride In. They do Pride and franchise of diversity audits, like Pride in Sport, Pride in Diversity Inclusion, Pride in Health and Wellbeing, where companies pay, say Sports Australia paid $10,000 to be audited to see how it complied to the LGBTQI, or in other words, it complies to gender identity ideology, using pronouns, removing gendered language, teaching LGBTQI and diversity inclusions for all the layers, and mainly just gender identity ideology. So they also, in the area of the medical transitioning, they run a website called Trans Hub. And Trans Hub's specific purpose is to socially and medically transition youth. So on their website, you're going to find that they push puberty blockers, and the local puberty blockers over here are, I'm going to probably mispronounce them, just fair warning. There is Goserelin, and Leuprolizumab, and Triptorelin. I think that's the only one I got right. So the cost of puberty blockers for a young person, they need to have them at least something like 5 to 6, about 4 to 6 times a year, depending. And they cost roughly about 200, 300, 350 each. So roughly about in a given year, the child's paying, the parents are paying about $800 to $1,200 for a child to be on puberty blockers. Now on the Trans Hub website, Royal Children's Hospital, which is another major lobby and gets money from this, has said that there's about 45,000 trans children. So my friend Kit Kowalski did the math on that and said, well, okay, if it's 60% of 45,000 of these trans kids are on puberty blockers, and let's just round it up to $1,000. So 60% of 45,000 kids, that's 27,000 times 1,000, that makes $27 million a year. And one of the things that the various lobbies are pushing for is to bring down the age where children can get to socially and medically transition, okay? Because then you use more puberty blockers, 5 to 6 years, that works. So who's making money from that? So ACON makes money from this with their training for socially transitioning. They make money with their audits, $10,000 a pop for these bigger organizations, and etc. The clinics are making money. When you go to the doctors, that's about $200 a pop for this particular thing, because it's off-label. It's not part of the prescribed medical system. When the thing is off-label, so for example, these kind of drugs like Lupron was one of the first ones that were used for things like castration and endometriosis and different forms of cancers. There was a time when you've got kids who've got early onset of puberty, maybe at 8 or 9 years old, they use it for a very tiny, short piece of time, because what happens is that if they don't, there are a lot of side effects to it. There's bone density issues, there's lowering IQ issues, a whole swath of it. So I'd ask you to research it. These are experimental drugs, as was dictated by the Tavistock versus Kira Bell case late last year in December, that these are basically experimental drugs that are being used on children. They really don't know the consequences of all these drugs, but there are negative side effects to them. So here's the other thing that you might want to understand, that there's also ancillary markets around this whole industry. So you've got a kid on a social transitioning, then you've got things that you can purchase like packers. These are little models of penises and testicles that they put in young girls' pants. Then you've got chest binders, which do damage to kids' chests, by the way. And actually for young girls, I've seen on social media, those who are looking to transition, they want to get their breasts cut off because these binders are painful to their chest. And then, of course, you've got markets like Facebook, social media, and Netflix, etc. This is a highly watched topic. So they make movies of making very, narrative and friendly narratives about people trying to be who they really are. Nothing about detransitioners, of course. Nothing on them. The 21,000 plus on Reddit group, for example. No. So another, and then there's a portion of the market. There's also a strategy behind all this to lock in this market as a permanent thing, and also embedded in its culture. And that has been, and the organization involved in that is Dentons. And I do want to talk a little bit about them, because Dentons put together a handbook. Dentons is the world's largest lawyer firm, and they have as one of their clients Stryker. Stryker is run by John Stryker. He's a trans woman. He has an Arcus Foundation. To date, they've given about $58.4 million to LGBTQIA, mainly the trans movement. And there's lots of pharmaceuticals involved in there. There's two other big ones like Pritzker, for example, who funded the old guy in America. What's his name? I don't know. He's so nondescript. Biden. Biden. So that's why you got the girls allowing trans into sports places straight away. First thing, lots of money he got from him. Going off topic, getting back on. So Dentons, one thing they did is they put a handbook together with a whole bunch of goals that they want to apply all across the world. And the handbook was given to IGLIO, which is a youth trans activist movement. I'm going to have to apologize to ManaWāhineKōrero because they hate slides and things like that, but it really helps to see the. So let me do. All right, so Dentons created a handbook, and to lock in this market, there's at least 8 goals, and the ones we're going to look at is those goals related to the youth transitioning industry. So the first one we're looking at is that one of the goals is to make a really cheap process for gender recognition, which is entirely self-determined. And that wasn't just for adults, because the next step was to be able to make that possible for minors. So the goals with that, related to that, is remove parental consent to medical and socially transitioning to the parents of the opposite sex, to remove parental consent to the legal recognition of minors. What does that mean? It means that we've actually seen a law like that over in New South Wales, Bulletin 55, where if the kids are social transitioning and the school doesn't feel that the parents would be happy about Joey becoming Josephine, then they're not told. We've seen that also in Scotland, when they've lowered the age of 4 years old for social transitioning minors, and the parents don't have to be told. So that's that. There's no recording. They've got, one of the goals is no recording of a child's sex at all on their birth certificate. So you'll notice the first step to that goal is to get in self-ID and to get allow for the birth certificate to be changed by adults to whatever they've transitioned to. But the next step, the goal is actually to go for no recognition of sex at all for children, until maybe when they're 18 years old and when they know who they are. Then there's a recognition of third gender, because non-binary is also a good market, a new market, because you have a lot of lesbians who might not identify as males, but they're pushed to identify as queer. or non-binary, which means what they do is they still go for the removal of the breast. So that's money. Then there's gender confirmation. Then they want to have it so that to increase this market, how about the government pay for it? How about the public pay for it? Because then it reduces the cost of all these surgeries and drugs and cross-sex hormones, etc. They don't have to pay for it. The country's paying for it. You and I is paying for it. So they want that to happen. That increases the market. And lastly, the most insidious things is they want sanctions on anyone who does not confirm an individual's gender identity or them going on the social transitioning path. So, you know, what you've got then is parents haven't got a say in their children. And you're selling directly and marketing directly to young children. All this without any real competency to make decisions like that. You take the parents out of it altogether to bring good piece of money in. So have you got a sense now perhaps why it's so that this market is huge. It is a $5.2 trillion market. And you can see perhaps why that it's a good guesstimate that over a life of a child starting on this process, or anyone starting on this process, it's around about 150 to 200K over their lifetimes. Huge, huge business. And one of the reasons why other organizations, particularly the tech organizations, Facebook and Twitter and etc., are on board with this. So hopefully that gives you a bit of the size of the market. Cheers.